What happens when the world of sin collides with the black church? When people want to do right, but are surrounded by a bunch of people who make it hard for them to do so. Let's go down that road. Studying from the 1945 book Black Metropolis by Dr. St. Clair Drake and Horace Caton. Respect. During the periods when the lower class has had regular employment, the First World War, the fat years, and the present period, it has been more inclined to spend its money for commercial recreation than for voluntary organizations. So when they had money, the lower class was more likely to spend it on paid entertainment rather than on organizations. Is there anything wrong with that? No. That was simply their preference. But the result was that the commercial venues grew while the voluntary groups saw less support. Even during the Depression years when funds for recreation were very limited, the neighborhood movie houses, the cheaper taverns, and the pool rooms continued to do a flourishing business. Bank nights and souvenir nights attracted nickels and dimes with a promise of economic gain as well as fun and excitement. I wonder how that happened. How did the entertainment venues still flourish during the 1929 Great Depression? The crowds that frequented Bronzeville's commercial dance halls, its wrestling and boxing matches, and the city's baseball games were evidence that the lower class was able to garner enough from the relief, WPA, and odd jobs to have a good time. No need to ask Negroes if they could or could not afford it during the Depression. The fact that many attended venues was all the evidence needed. It showed that Negroes could figure out a way to scrounge up money to get what they really wanted. Whether that money came from relief or odd jobs, the pursuit of pleasure, direct and exciting, is a dominating feature of lower class life. The ability to access anything instantly is a dominant feature of the internet. It's what makes the internet what it is. The pursuit of pleasure is the dominant feature of the lower class, and it has long defined them. So we're talking about a pattern of behavior, a pattern that produces repeatable results, which people then label as lower class. Most of the time during the Depression years, the masses of the lower class could not afford to pay for admission to commercial dance halls except on special occasions. So they did this. When they wanted to dance, they simply pitched a boogie-woogie at home, using the radio or a Victrola for music, or they congregated at a buffet flat or tavern where the more affluent would feed nickels into a jukebox. However it had to happen, that's how it went down. And there's nothing wrong with this. People should be able to have a good time if that's what they want. Lower class people will publicly drink and play cards in places where people of higher status would lose their reputations. In the rear of pool rooms, in the back rooms of taverns, in buffet flats, and sometimes on street corners and in alleys. We already know who didn't approve of this. They will dance on the dime and grind around the jukebox in taverns and joints, or cut a rug at the larger public dance halls. They will clown on a street corner or in public parks. Did we think that this was something new that just popped up recently? Think again. This is between the 1930s and 40s. And the reason that a lot of this sounds familiar is because blacks have been caught in the loop, on the Ferris wheel, spinning round and round until people choose to get off. So clowning around on the street corners and in the public parks, this must have happened frequently enough back then for the authors to take note. It is this public behavior that outrages the sensibilities of Bronzeville's dicties.
It gives the race a bad name,
they are quick to announce. The more successful and affluent Negroes were called dicties. They wanted the lower class Negroes to hide that behavior because it was an embarrassment to them. The whites viewed that behavior as unruly, annoying, and a sign of low moral character. And they also tended to see all Negroes as the same, which meant that assessment was assigned to the dicties' reputation as well. Hence, it gives the race a bad name. Now let's move on. Policy is technically on the illegit, but it is a protected business. Policy means gambling in this context. It was illegal but protected. Protected by who? By police officers and others working on behalf of politicians. If they could receive a slice of the pie, then they would look the other way. Bronzeville's bootlegging, freak shows, reefer dens, and pads, however, must operate as an underworld. The underworld in this context is the economy that operates outside of the limits of formal law. It typically involves activities that disrupt social order. On one end, there were highly organized criminals like the Italian-American mafia, and on the other end, there were smaller, loosely organized street operators, like what Negroes in Bronzeville at this time were doing. And the activities that both ends participated in largely centered around the black market, buying and selling illegal goods and services. They too are protected, but liquor, dope, and women are too hot for an open political fix. So reefer, freak shows, and bootlegging could be protected, but liquor, prostitutes, and strong dope was where the politicians drew the line. It was too hot and way too risky. Money passes, but in a very guarded fashion, and usually it is small change, to the cop on the beat or to the minor ward politicians. Corruption at its finest. We got the police involved, along with the lower level political figures. The big shot politicians play the game safe. How? Use the lower level political figures as middlemen. They take the cut from the streets and they bring a piece of that to the big shot, who turns around and tells the cops which street operators to let slide. So the big shot politician was protected in this instance because he could claim that he never took any bribes directly. His hands were clean and he didn't know anything about anything. The primary institutions of the underworld are the tougher taverns, the reefer pads, the gambling dens, the liquor joints, and the call houses and buffet flats where professional prostitutes cater to the trade in an organized fashion. Much of the petty gambling, bootlegging, and prostitution, however, is carried on in apartment houses, particularly in kitchenette buildings whose owners and superintendents make little or no effort to control the tenants' activities. The denizens of the underworld operate on a much wider scale and may be found drumming up business in cabarets, more or less respectable dance halls, and, in the case of prostitutes, on the streets. Bronzeville has always had an underworld operating in intimate relationships with the city political machine. It has never had a highly organized gang world, however, dealing in alcohol, dope, robbery, murder, and women. It was lower level, just like mentioned earlier. The Italian Americans were the big shots in Chicago's highly organized underworld. Bronzeville's criminals tend to be lone wolves, and the Black Belt's reputation as a vice area today rests primarily on arrests for petty misdemeanors, crimes of passion, and street walking. So that was the extent of Negro underworld activity at that time. Let's move forward. There are about 500 policy stations in Bronzeville, 80 pool rooms, 200 taverns, and scores of buffet flats and dives. But there are also about 500 churches, at least 300 of these being located in definitely lower-class neighborhoods, which should let you know that more churches doesn't automatically mean better living. Lower-income areas in America typically have the most churches, but also have the most people struggling. The church can be a stabilizing tool, as we'll see shortly, but it's still a tool. That's what we have to understand. And it's a tool that's only as good as the people know how to use it. Just opening up the Bible and repeating a few scriptures isn't going to solve any problems. Just like opening up an engineering book, reading a few lines, and then expecting the equipment to build itself. The real change comes from interpreting the text then applying that interpretation. And the skills vary. That's why people could pray all day long and not get anywhere. The evening hours of Bronzeville's lower-class areas are noisy with the cacophony of both hymns and blues, gospel songs and low-down music. It is obvious that some people in Bronzeville take their pleasure by making a joyful noise unto the Lord. This complex that we have just described is to them the world of sin, and they claim to live in it but not of it. Remember, the lower-class church members were surrounded by disorderly Negroes. So they claimed to live in it, but were not of it. The church-oriented segment of the lower class is important because it represents an element of stability in a disordered milieu. So it worked for this segment in providing some stability within the chaos. The church world is a women's world, for less than a third of the lower-class church members are men. We know most women from this lineage love the church. The men love it too, but not nearly as much. These lower-class church women are, on the whole, an influence for stable family relations within their social strata. So they promoted marriage, keeping the home together, and they were a positive influence on family stability within the lower class. As they phrase it, they are often unequally yoked together with men who are sinners, and whose sin is reflected in a devotion to gambling, extramarital sex relations, and big timing. So here's where the men were slipping up. If they had a woman who was faithful and promoting stability, then what was the need for stepping out of the marriage? Those were men who had no control over the animal nature. They allow the animal within to take full control over the driver's seat once the sexual fires ignite. So women, speaking directly to you, if a man is a big timer or someone who's showing off a lot and you get with him, then don't be surprised by the outcome. Acknowledge your mistake, fix yourself, or you'll keep riding around the Ferris wheel. Now let's continue. Respectable lowers, male and female, are usually church people, but they are a decided minority within the large lower class, only a few. So the energy in this environment was not in their favor. The Negro dicties and the larger white world view lower class religion with amused condescension. To some lower class people, however, identification with the church is considered the better alternative of a forced option, complete personal disorganization or serving the Lord, either be in complete chaos like the rest of them, or hand their heart over to Jesus. They chose the latter. Slightly over half of Bronzeville's 100,000 lower-class adults claim to be church members. The majority of these identify themselves with the Baptist or Methodist denominations, and are therefore nominally committed to opposing gambling, card playing, dancing, drinking, fornication, and similar derelictions. Nominally committed means by name and not reality. They were affiliated with churches that say they were against those things, but in practice, many of the members didn't live by those rules. So essentially just saying the words without any real inner conviction behind them. The prevailing attitude of Bronzeville's lower-class church people is expressed in an old spiritual,
"Give me that old-time religion. It's good enough for me,"
drawn into the Baptist and Methodist evangelical tradition by white missionaries during and immediately after slavery. White missionaries taught Negroes about the Lord. When? Initially during slavery. And what's the rule? If it came from slavery, it must be examined under the microscope. Negroes have preserved on a large scale the religious behavior which was prevalent on the American frontier between 1800 and 1890. Since, however, the Negro church has evolved in isolation from the white church, certain distinctive modifications and colorations have grown up which give Negro religious services a flavor all their own. They took what they learned from the white missionaries and added their own flavor to it. They molded it into their own liking. It's like taking beans and adding special seasoning to it. It's still beans, but it's flavored in a particular way. The fountainhead of the old-time religion is the rural South, the Bible Belt, Urban life puts its stamp on this religion, and while the basic features of the old beliefs and rituals persist in Bronzeville, they have been modified by contact with the complexities of a large northern city. Remember, culture in one environment gets altered and changed when it moves and comes in contact with another environment. This is what happened here. Sin and the devil, too, are wilier adversaries in Chicago than in the less complicated world of the Deep South. They needed more devil talk in the city, because Chicago was much wilder than the rural Deep South. To most of Bronzeville's lower-class church people, sin is a malevolent reality. It was responsible for Adam's fall. It is the cause of all our present woes, individual and collective. In defining sin, there is much unanimity on the nature of the major sins, and much disagreement about the minor ones. One preacher at a lower-class revival took as his subject,
"Look what sin has done. Let's get rid of it."
He named as the main derelictions adultery, anger, atheism, cheating, acting stuck up, covetousness, being too critical, deceit, dishonesty, disloyalty, gambling, hypocrisy, backbiting, and spasmodic speaking to one another, lack of personal cleanliness, fighting in the home, drunkenness, and sex immorality. References to lower-class sex and family behavior are prevalent in sermons delivered before lower-class congregations. The following excerpt from a Sunday sermon in one of Bronzeville's largest churches illustrates the usual type of attack upon sinful family habits.
"Why, the people have lost all self-respect, and most of our children are brought up in homes where there is strife, anger, and viciousness all the time. Some of you people lie down mad and get up mad, just cursing and swearing all the time over the children. I sometimes wonder, can't you that live that sort of life find a place for Jesus in your homes? That's where to start a remedy, right in your home life. One thing I want to impress upon you, no couple should ever marry that don't have love and respect for each other."
That's good advice from the preacher. The tone of such a sermon would imply that the pattern of sex and family behavior described in chapter 20 as typically lower class is characteristic of church people as well as sinners. That's what I mean by the tool being only as good as its users. People can hear the message all day in the church, but if they never apply it, then progress is never going to happen. Interviews with a score of preachers in intimate contact with the lower class, as well as observation of families affiliated with lower-class churches, seem to indicate that where both heads of a family are church people, the unit tends to have a pattern similar to that of the middle class. So lower-class income, but not lower-class values. Most of the members of lower-class churches, however, are women married to husbands who are unchurched or women who have been deserted or divorced. In the latter case, sexual affairs outside of marriage, while frowned upon, do not ordinarily result in social ostracism so long as they do not involve open scandals or public fights. The influence of the church on lower-class sex and family life seems to be confined to moderating public brawling and to creating a group of women who try to make their children respectable and encourage them to assume a middle-class family pattern, even though they themselves, due to weakness of the flesh or bitter experiences with men, do not maintain stable family relations. So this group of women more often talked the talk but didn't walk the walk. They're different from the women earlier who were fully committed to the respectable life and stability. But the ones here we're hearing about, they're aspiring to get there, but they keep slipping and falling down into the pit. Children of such families are often torn between affection for a parent and contempt or disgust for the family behavior pattern. It is probable that juvenile delinquency is closely related to such conflicts. There are, of course, numerous lower-class women whose lives are so completely organized around the church and religion or middle-class ideology that sexual delinquency would never occur. Let's close it right here. We're going to go deeper into the church world in the next commentary. So right now, I thank you for your time and attention. My name is Brooklyn St. Michael, and I'll see you in the free world.